Urswick School in Hackney, East London, is on the up. Founded in 1520 to educate the poor, after a checkered past, results are improving and pupils are disciplined. But there is real fear here about changes to the funding formula, designed to redistribute money more fairly between inner-city schools and those in parts of England that have historically received less. The government has promised that no school will lose cash, but head teacher Richard Brown is worried about a race to the bottom, and the uncertainty around Theresa May's fragile new government isn't helping either.
I don't know my budget for the next financial year, which will start next April. I could be looking at a 3% cut. I could be looking at a budget that is similar to what I've got now. I can't do any long-term financial planning while there is this continual uncertainty that stems from government.
So just to be clear, if your funding's cut, that means you'll have to get rid of teachers?
If our funding is going to be cut year on year for the next 3 years, which is something that was suggested, 3% a year for 3 years, there is only one way of then living within that cut, and that is by making teaching staff redundant. Now, we have a dedicated set of teachers here, experienced teachers who meet the needs of the children, and yet I might have to be in a position of deciding if any of those need to go. That is not where I want to be, it's not where parents want me to be, and it shouldn't be what government wants either.
And how many teachers are you talking about?
Worst case scenario, if we were facing 3% cuts for the next 3 years, which is something that was proposed at one point, that could be anything up to 25 teaching posts. That would be a catastrophic situation for us to be in. And equally, it's not just this school. Every school in Hackney and every school in inner London is facing exactly the same situation.
Do you think politicians really understand the pressures that schools are under?
No, I think that they imagine that there's some sort of fat and that we can trim the fat and then we can still deliver what we're delivering now. That is not what we can do. We have already reduced the number of support staff in the school. We're spending less money on music tuition next year. So far, we have avoided any staff redundancies. We've used natural wastage. Other schools in the area have already made teachers redundant. This is a real issue for schools that politicians do need to address urgently.
Pay is another contentious issue. Since 2010, public sector pay rises have been frozen or capped at 1%. Teachers here worry it's putting people off the profession.
Being newly married, it's a strain, to buy a property, and that's something that I want to be able to do in the future. But with cuts, to my pay, there's only so much I can do. So currently I am renting, but I'm hoping that in the future that's something that can obviously change, so I can buy my own property and be a homeowner.
And could it be putting off other teachers entering the profession?
Yes, definitely. During my teacher training, I was studying to be a teacher with many passionate individuals who are currently now leaving the profession because of the pay cuts.
We love the profession, so we're here. But I think new people going through university, thinking about doing PGCEs, they're probably put off because they're thinking, am I going to be able to afford to live?
Now things are getting political, with parents producing slick campaign material and even roping in the kids too.
Schools just wanna have fun.
This particular sing-along was produced by Fair Funding for All Schools, who will march on Westminster next weekend calling for increased investment in education.
Parents are very concerned but also very unhappy because we've been lied to. The last government said that education spending was protected, but it wasn't. And this means that parents are deeply unhappy that their children will be impacted by these cuts when they needn't be. We should be investing in our schools.
After losing her majority, Theresa May is vulnerable and MPs have scented blood. She's already ditched plans to scrap free school meals for primary schools. Now politicians from all parties are calling for an end to the public sector pay cap. The problem is, all this costs money.
How much you can do about public sector pay is about as long as a piece of string. Each 1% you add to the public sector pay bill costs you more than £1.5 billion. So each little bit costs quite a lot. So if you want to do a lot, then it's going to cost you a really significant amount.
I'm keen to talk a bit more widely about austerity as well, because it seems like it's become a bit of a dirty word recently, is it?
If you look at social care, you look at the health service, you look at what's happening in prisons, to some extent you look at what's happening in schools, and you're really beginning to see that there is an impact in terms of the quality of public services, in terms of waiting times, and all those sorts of things. So it's got much more difficult in the last couple of years.
So is now the time to ease up then on austerity?
There is potential scope to ease up on austerity. We could spend an extra few £billion a year, but in the end, we have debt still at 90% or nearly 90% of national income. At some point we really need to make a choice, and that is, are we going to have a bigger state? And if we're going to have a bigger state, more spending in total, then at some point we will have to have more tax. Or we're going to decide, well, the state at its current level is about the right size. In that case, we just have to get used to living in a world in which we've got less in the way of public services than we would previously have expected.
In extreme times, however, political expediency often trumps fiscal rules. It's not just backbench MPs arguing for a public sector pay rise, but ministers too. As a result, the austerity agenda may not survive the end of the year, no matter how much it costs.